Hello class, welcome again to our explainer video. So in this video, I'm going to present to you the real presentation of the chapter 2 for your thesis paper. So in our previous lesson, I have discussed about the introductory or the summary of chapter 2 on what is the content within this chapter 2. So before I will jump into our formal discussion, I will just review first from our previous discussion. So again, in the presentation of data, there is a general statement. And then, you will highlight the trend, range of values, and other interesting aspects. So there is a general statement, and then the highlight of the trend, range of values, and other interesting aspect, which is presented in this part. Also, in our previous discussion, there is three important things that shown in the chapter 2. First, we need to start with a brief introductory paragraph giving the purpose of the data in the table. There is a brief introductory paragraph. And then in number 2, follow up with it with a statement presenting the table itself. And then the 3, last, analyze and interpret the findings therein. So in the first part, there is a brief introductory. So this is the brief introductory, or in other words, a general statement. Okay, so this is the brief introductory. Your statement here must discuss all in the chapter 2, all the presentation of your data using a general statement. Okay, for example, there are 4 parts presented in this table. The first part presents that respondent's profile regarding their age, sex, civil status, highest educational statement. So there are 4, meaning there are 4 tables, there are 4 presentations, and you must have an interpretations and analysis of the data every part. Okay, so first part, for example here, the respondent's profile. The second part is the representative's response to management of beach resorts. The third part displays the various stakeholders' perception. And then the fourth part, this one, fourth part, displays the result of the test of a significant relationship. So in chapter 4, there are 4 tables. So in every part, there is a brief discussion. Okay, first part, second part, third part, and then fourth part. Okay, so this is the explanation beyond this statement. Start with a brief introductory paragraph giving the purpose of the data in the table. Next, follow it with a statement presenting the table itself. So from brief introductory, general statement, you will proceed to the specific statement. Again, for example, in the first part, this is the brief introductory. Brief introductory. This is the brief introductory. It explains the whole tables, the whole chapter 2. What can be read in the chapter 2. Next, number 2, the specific description in every table. Again, this part explains all the 4 parts. After the brief introductory or introduction or statement, you will proceed to the specific. So again, the first part is the presentation of the respondent's profile. So below here, the demographic profile or the respondent's profile. So the description here is only discuss about the demographic profile or the respondent's profile. Okay, this is a specific statement that summarize the table here. Okay, so in this table, you have written here a small letter n, which means only a sample size. So I have 20 respondents. If it is capital letter N, it means that it is a total population. So for example, your respondents is all people within Kandihay. So for example, there are 5,000 people here in Kandihay, and it's not possible to give each one of the respondents with the questionnaire. Imagine you will print more than 5,000 questionnaires. So you need to have a sample size that will represent the total population. So in this area, I believe that you have asked an advice to your statistician. So again, this is letter N because this is only a sample size. This is a representation of the total population. But for example, you have a respondents with only have a limited number of respondents. For example, your respondents is the HM instructor of Baisu Kandihay. So in our campus, there are only 7 HM instructors. So you don't need to have a sample size because there is only a little number of respondents. So instead of putting small letter n here, you will put a capital letter N, which means total population, all HM instructors. Okay, so this is how you present the table. There are only 2 lines in the top and then 1 line in the bottom, and there is no line both side. Okay, there are only 2 lines in the top and then 1 line at the bottom. So let's proceed to number 3. Lastly, you need to analyze and interpret the findings. So this is the findings put into the table. And after you have consulted with your statistician, I do believe that you have received the computation or the total number or the findings of your after giving the data of your respondents. So now let's proceed to the analysis and interpretation of your data. So in the first part, you need to mention, instead of discussing each one of these, for example, in age, there is an age bracket. Instead of discussing every age bracket, you will just have to highlight the highest and the lowest. So let's go back to our previous discussion. Okay, in our previous discussion, I have mentioned here there's a general statement in the first part, and then on the second part there's a specific statement per table. And then another important thing also is to highlight the trend, the range of values, and other interesting aspect. So for the analysis and interpretation of data, instead of having a discussion to all the age bracket, you will just highlight the highest and the lowest. You will start with the highest and then you will proceed to the lowest. For example, in age, the highest frequency is what? 6. And then the lowest frequency is 2. So for your analysis and interpretation of your data, you will just highlight the trend. You will just highlight the highest and the lowest. So for example, here, the respondents' highest proportion, 30%, belong to the age bracket of 40 years old and above. So just a review here, 40 and above. Okay, you have highlighted the 40 and above. Okay, so after you have highlight the highest one, you need to have an interpretation of the data. So this is based on your own words. I repeat, in this part, you will explain the data that you have mentioned here, the highest, and then after that, I'll just highlight this one. After that, you will have an interpretation of the data. So this highlighted in green, this must be your own words, your interpretation. And then after that, you will mention also the lowest, which is the number 2, 35 to 39. Let's check here. On the other hand, only a few or 10% of the respondents were 35 to 39 years old. Okay, so this is the lowest, and then this one is the highest. So there is a presentation of the data, statement style. This is a table, and then this is a paragraph style of the presentation of the data. And after the presentation of the data in a paragraph form, you will back up it with your interpretation. Again, this must be your own words. Okay, and then let's go back to our previous discussion. There's a reminders here. Your analysis and interpretation of data must be balanced subjectively and objectively. Okay, your discussion in the table or your interpretation of the table or the data must have a balance subjectively and objectively. You need to also consider the previous study or the literature background, so that you can have a broader knowledge before you will write your interpretation here. That will have a backup that I will have to discuss later on, the putting of citation. So again, I will repeat. You have a presentation of the data here in a table form, and then you will have a presentation of the data again, highlighted the highest and the lowest. This is the highest, and then after presenting the data using a paragraph form, you will have to proceed to your analysis and interpretation of the data. It must be your own words. And remember, before you have to write this one, you need to read a lot of previous study, related study, so that you will have a broadened knowledge before you will write or type your interpretation here. So after having the highlight the highest, you have an interpretation, and then you discuss again the lowest, and then you will also have a interpretation. Again, before you have an interpretation, you need to read a lot of related studies, so that your analysis and interpretation of the data will not bias. It must be subjectively as at the same time objectively. Same pattern for the sex, for the civil status. Okay, ilang nako tagsa-tagsaon, they have the same pattern here. We have sex, we have civil status, we also have here educational background. We also have here occupation, have the same pattern, highlighted the highest, and after highlighting the highest, you have interpretation, and then presenting the lowest, and then you have a interpretation. And then for the last part, I do believe the last part is the occupation. So in the occupation, there's a highest, and then there is a lowest. And then you will have to, again, back up with related studies. You will cite related studies to back up your statements. Okay, so this is important. If you will input this one, if you will put a citation, it will back up your claims. Okay, so let's have a review. You have a presentation of your data in a table form, and after that you have to highlight the highest and the lowest, this yellow highlighted one. After you have presenting the data using a paragraph form, you will back up it with your own words, your analysis and interpretation of the data based on your own words. And again, before you will write this statement, you must read a lot of related studies so that you will have a broadened understanding of this topic. And then you will avoid bias, so that whatever you have written here must be subjectively, at the same time objectively. And after highlighting, you have the same pattern here in sex, civil status, educational attainment, and occupation. You will back up it with a citation. Okay, citation to support your claims. So that is the example for the respondent's profile. Now, let's proceed to the extent of implementation of solid waste and wastewater management in the beach resort. So again, there are many indicators in this variable. So they have a general statement, and after the general statement, there is a specific statement in the table. And again, you have a presentation of the data using a table form. This is small letter n, it means that this is only a sample size that represents the total population. So let's proceed. Let's take a look here. This is a different form because there is in the previous table there is a frequency, there is a rank, percentage, but in this table it discusses about the weighted mean. Okay, so in the weighted mean, same pattern. You will just highlight the highest and you will only highlight the lowest. So let's take a look in the bottom part. So in this part, again, in the previous table, it discusses first the highest and then the lowest. So in this table, we will use, it is called deductive reasoning or deductive discussion. Start from the broadened part, overall aggregate mean, next to aggregate mean per indicators. Okay, instead of starting with the highest mean here and then the lowest, instead of doing that, it is called inductive. But for the presentation of the weighted mean, we will use deductive reasoning or discussion. We will start in the general statement to specific, just like a inverted pyramid from the, okay, I'll just have a drawing, just like an inverted triangle. You will start with the general statement until you will go to the specific statement. Okay, so meaning we will start with the generic until to the specific. So let's take an example here. So in the presentation of the data using a paragraph form, it starts with the overall aggregate mean. So this is the overall aggregate mean. You have the presentation of the data using a paragraph form. I will highlight again here with a yellow highlight. And then you will proceed to the interpretation and analysis of the data. Okay, same pattern in the previous table that I have discussed. But in this part, again, it uses a deductive discussion. Start from the generic to specific. So we start with the aggregate, overall aggregate mean. Okay, overall aggregate mean. So next, I will have a question for you. After discussing the overall aggregate mean, what should be next? If we will use a deductive discussion. After all the aggregate mean, we will proceed to what? We will proceed to the aggregate mean per indicators. Okay? Before we will proceed to the highest and lowest in every indicator. Okay, so let's take a look here. So again, for a review, after you have presenting the table, the data in a table form, you have presented the table, the data again using a paragraph form, this yellow highlighted one, and then after presenting the data using a paragraph form, you will discuss it with your own words, this green highlighted one. And then again, before you will have a statement here, you must read a lot of related studies so that there will be no bias. It must be balanced, the subjectively and objectively discussion. After you have a statement here, you need to back up it with a citation. Again, what is the purpose of citation? So that it will support your claims that you have mentioned here, this green highlighted one. Okay? I hope that you still catch up what I have discussed here. Next is, if we start with the overall aggregate mean, we will proceed to the aggregate mean per indicators. Okay? So it starts with the aggregate mean in the accommodation. Okay, the accommodation. So as we have read here, it starts with the high implemented in terms of this is the explanation in the accommodation. Okay, there's a presentation of the data using a paragraph form, and then there's an interpretation of the data. And after the presentation of the data, you will back up with a citation. And then for the next indicators, it discusses the highest weighted mean. Okay, highest weighted mean, and then there's an explanation here based on your statement, and then back up with a citation. And after that, you will discuss the lowest weighted mean. Okay, so same pattern, start from the highest to lowest. After presenting the data using a paragraph form, again you need to explain in your own words, and then before you have written here, you must read a lot of related studies, and then you will back up it with a citation. Okay, So same process on the tables here. Okay, there's a lot of tables here for a sample table, but I hope that you have learned from this short video. So I will just have a recap in this part. I do believe there's no question here mentioned above. If you have some questions, just chat in our group chat. So for a review, in weighted min, we will use deductive discussion. What do you mean by deductive discussion? We will start with the highest, with the generic discussion until we will proceed to the specific. What we are going to do is, first part, you have to mention the overall aggregate min. After discussing the overall aggregate min, let's proceed to the aggregate min per indicator. So let's start with the number 1, accommodation. We will start with the aggregate min. After discussing the aggregate min, we will discuss the highest, which is this one. And then you will discuss also the lowest one. And after that, you will proceed to number 2, food and beverage. You will start with the aggregate min, and then next you will proceed to the highest aggregate min. And after discussing the highest, you will proceed to the lowest. Okay, so again, there's a presentation of the data, and after that there is a presentation of the data using a paragraph form. And after discussing or after presenting the data using a paragraph form, you will have your own discussion, interpretation, and analysis of the data. Again, before you have written here your analysis and interpretation, you must read a lot of related studies to avoid bias, so that it will be subjectively at the same time objectively. And after such discussion, you will have a backup with a citation to support your claims. I hope that you have learned from this explainer video, and don't forget to answer the post test. Thank you.